Welcome back, folks. This is Annette of AnnetteLeonard.com back with Chronic Wellness, and thanks for joining me for part two of my interview with author and teacher Arlene Faulk, where we are talking about her memoir, Walking on Pins and Needles. And stay tuned. At the end of this podcast, I'll be talking to you about how you can win a copy of her book. Thanks so much. Rejoining part two of our interview here now. So your life continued on, and a high-powered life it was. I mean, you were relentless in your intellectual pursuits and in your pursuits at work, and you were breaking glass ceilings and breaking down sort of what titles women had held at different companies prior to your work there. And you said, I struggled to allow myself to take breaks, to let loose and have fun. Yet I know it was too much stress. I know it was too much work. This is 1978 as you're writing that.
Right.
And then you write at a time in New York, you say, in my Midwest upbringing, I was taught to keep my feelings pretty much to myself, tough it out. Other people have worse problems. Dad didn't ever like the word therapist or psychiatrist. He thought it was a sign of weakness to see someone just for the purpose of talking. I rarely talk about my personal sadness, disappointment, or anger. And I wonder, looking back now, what you make of that, or what connections you see between that and your illness, or that and your wellness, or not.
Yes, that's a very good insight, because looking back, I think that keeping emotions, the stress inside, it does take a toll on our body. And it might not show up for years. It might, or it might not. When I was in New York City, and I was, as you mentioned, getting promotions, moving up the ladder, and working in a major airline, which is a very stressful job that I had. But I was very motivated, and there was a lot of reward in the work that was being done. I joined a health club, and I was in the locker room one day, and there were these women, and so I was in my late 20s, and there were women in there nude with their towels, and they were just talking. Their hands were flying and saying, I remember one conversation, I was talking about a therapist. I've been going for 15 years. You'd think I'd know this better by now. And talking to our friend, he said, I know that too. They're both talking about their therapist, and they had their emotions and everything right out in the open. And I tuned in, and I mentioned this because it was so opposite of the way I was raised. And as you mentioned, what you read there, that I kept my feelings inside, and here these people were freely talking about them in a gym locker room. So that was actually good in terms of New York, not just that one incident, but in terms of experiences there, in terms of opening me up some more. It was the first place I really asked for some help when I had some physical issues that were causing me to consider if I could even get up the steps or walk out the door or walk home. And I think that not at the time did I realize how much the keeping everything inside might have been, it's not necessarily cause, but affecting negatively the degree of stress in my body, not just my mental and emotional stress, but the stress in the body, in terms of letting go, in terms of accepting more what's happening. And then I found later need to be in a more relaxed state to make good choices about my body, because like our mind, our body in a stressful situation wants to either pull in and tighten or flee.
Mm-hmm. That time in New York seems to have been a real time of growth, both personally and professionally, and then also of learning about yourself.
Yes.
Looking back now, how would you speak to that, or how would you kind of typify that to someone?
I think that it was everything that you just mentioned in terms of, I like the energy. It was a fast energy, and that suited me well. In terms of the people that I met, the different kinds of people, but what I remember is that there were some that I met that thought they were very cosmopolitan and just, really with it in a number of ways from business. It's a seat of financial, Wall Street, et cetera. A lot going on there. And there is a lot of sophistication. But then I would realize that some of the people who thought they were very sophisticated, they really only knew about New York and LA. And there was nothing in between. When I mentioned that I went to undergraduate school at the University of Iowa, they confused it with Ohio. So that was a good, we're all human. We all have our things. And so I wanted to look what was the best in New Yorkers. And I found in New York, because I had a lot of physical challenges when I was there. I used a cane when I was out and had trouble getting on the bus, had some trouble sometimes getting across the street. And I found New Yorkers being very, very helpful, very, very kind, and very, very helpful, seeing my situation. So I've really fondness for New York, where people will say, well, do you like Chicago better? I'm in Chicago now, and I was previously, to going to New York, and I can't compare them. They're a different kind of energy, and I had different experiences. But it did really open me up to new possibilities. And I did some dating. I had a friend I talked about a lot, who's an exercise instructor, Melody, and became a very good close friend. I really think that my relationships, in terms of like intimacy, were affected by my skin feeling like pins and needles and being excruciating at times. And so being touched was awful.
Yeah.
And people didn't understand that. Men and women didn't understand. I didn't always want to be hugged. And so I try to explain, but there's a time, and and I'm sure a number of your audience members know that it doesn't always serve you well to explain. Others don't understand. It's sort of a push off. And it's a fine line of how do you deal with creating some closeness in relationships, and yet having people understand that there's, I don't know if limitation's the right words, but there are some realities that I'm living with that are invisible, that are very real. And it's hard. I found it was hard to understand some of the people. So that wouldn't be casual relationships, but it would be more, say dating at that time. That's the word we would have used, and closeness.
Yeah. I
So
thought you did
that comes to mind, because that really was an issue when I was there.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. I thought you did an admirable job exploring that. And I think that it's something that becomes invisible about those of us living with pain conditions, that the ways in which pain impacts our intimacy.
Yes.
And you did a really beautiful job
exploring
and explaining that.
And I have found it's difficult to talk about. I did it's people don't always talk about a lot. If one person opens up, or I'm talking with somebody else with MS or fibromyalgia, the other conditions where there's chronic pain, then there can be a crack in, oh yes. But even those of us who have experienced that are sometimes reluctant to admit that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that as someone who has lived with chronic pain in varying degrees over many years, and I have a wife who I've been with for 25 years, so that relationship predates my pain, acknowledging the ways in which opening myself to pleasure is also opening myself to pain, and those run on the same track. And so at times having closed myself off and finding ways to open again, and acknowledging that both things will be true, and figuring out how to live with that and make peace.
I like that, acknowledging that both things are true, and that they can coincide in and not always be on the same level, but both can be true.
Yeah. one of the details that you include during that time that I didn't make a note of a quote, but that I was struck by was how you adopted the cane into your life. And I will just say that you were careful in your selection of a cane. And I think that that's important for anyone who has enough privilege to take great
Right.
care in picking something that matters to them. But I wonder internally what it was like to accept the need for that, or to acknowledge it is now time for me to take on an aid like that. Because I think for many of us, the barrier of accepting a device, a walker, a cane, a
Yeah.
chair, it's a hurdle. How was that for you?
It is a hurdle. I tried as best as I could for as long as I could to manage on my own, to walk across the street, to take it slowly, to be really mindful when I was walking about that I was walking, and I'll take a step and really get grounded, and then it fatigue, or it might have been pain, uh, or just muscle
Numbness.
weakness
Yeah.
scared me a little bit. I mean, I'm in New York City and things are fast, and I know the times. I have it in my book. I have X number of seconds to get across the street. Can I get there? Well, it's not only it's okay to toughen up and say I can do it, but reality needs to set in. And I thought, okay, I want to think about this. I think I need some help. What do I do? What is the best course of action for me? So I thought about it like, as I talk about it, like a prop in a play, and that it's okay to have uh, a device that will be helpful in carrying out the action that needs to happen. That's the way that I did it. And as I say in the book, when I shopped for it, I did have the privilege of being able to do that. And I didn't know anything about canes, and it wasn't, oh well, give me something, or go to the store that has wheelchairs and canes and all kinds of helpful devices. And that's fine. I'm not making a comment on that. But for me, um, I went to look, and I think I wasn't sure I was really going to do it. You know, when you say I tiptoed, knowing I needed to do something,
Yeah.
but I still was tiptoeing. And I was by myself, of course. And so I wanted to find something that I thought had some beauty in it, or some style. Looked at pictures on canes, and I had ideas of people, you know, when they do walking sticks.
Yeah.
And there's some really pretty cool and ones that are not just manufactured, but maybe styled from a piece of wood, you know, that they've taken time. And um,
Sorry.
so that for me was a process, and it was almost like I'm going to say an act and a play, that I wanted to say, let's have it be a prop, let's have it fit in. I didn't care that much actually what it looked like, but it was the idea that it was going to fit into my persona, and look like it fit there.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and then of course it took me a while to work with it and actually use it. But I was very happy that I did that.
Do you remember feeling self-conscious with it? Do you remember anyone else's reaction to it?
I did some practice. I did some practice with my friends so that I could be, so it would be an aid rather than a hazard, because it does take some practice.
Yeah.
And I think very early on in New York, what happened is what I mentioned just briefly earlier. People were so helpful. You know, can I help you? Or I remember getting help getting up the steps on buses. But when you have a cane or device of some kind, even in a wheelchair or motorized vehicle of some kind, I found that people were they'd either move out of the way so that there was room for you, and particularly on corners, because people tend to crowd right into, even in the wheelchair accessible part of a corner, people still stand there. And that didn't happen. I was really surprised. It really opened me up to having people saying yes to helping me. I would take an arm of strangers, and I did it. Yeah. So it was a process, but once I got out on the streets, it's interesting how New York really sort of set me free from that.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, was it any different for you with strangers versus with coworkers or others that you knew better?
Well, interesting you mentioned coworkers, because I'm going to say strangers, it was easier. I didn't use my cane at work. I might going in the door, but I didn't. I struggled, and I used the walls, or I'd walk really slowly. I'd have, what I do is say, let's meet in my office rather than going down to somebody else's office. I did it so that I wouldn't have to walk too much. I didn't say much at work at all. Certainly not what I was going through in terms of pain or the struggles I had inside, because I was concerned it would affect my career.
Yeah.
Looking back all these years, I think it would be, because I was increasingly taking on more positions of responsibility,
Yeah.
and going up in management might be seen as weakness. So that was a struggle, and I did not work through that struggle until for some years. And when I said something, what I said was, I remember it was the senior vice president of marketing. I remember him very clearly asked me, was something wrong? And I said, well, I've got a neurological issue, but it's being taken care of, and this cane really helps me be steady. And that was it. And nothing more was said.
All right. Wasn't that good? Yeah. So continue on with us tomorrow for part 3 of this interview, where we'll talk about what it was like to keep her diagnosis at work a secret, because there wasn't an ADA yet and insurance portability wasn't a thing. And because there was no Affordable Care Act, there was no insurance for folks with pre-existing conditions. So it was a time of fearfulness for folks with medical diagnoses that they didn't feel like they could disclose. Additionally, we'll talk about how it was to keep her diagnosis a secret from her parents, her thoughts on accepting her chronic illness, and what it was like for her to apply for Social Security disability. You won't want to miss it, I promise. Also, if you do not yet have a copy of Arlene's book, Walking on Pins and Needles, I think you'll want to have one. And so you can enter to win a copy from me, and instructions are detailed at the bottom of show notes, or you can surf over to my Instagram at the Annette Leonard, and I detail instructions there. I have pushed the contest deadlines till the end of June, because I was tardy getting this edited and posted. If you're watching it on video, you'll notice that you are only seeing Arlene's beautiful face, which is wonderful. And I thought we'd both be in the video, but it wasn't meant to be. Technical difficulties and whatnot. So do enter for a chance to win, and spread the information to anyone you think might be interested. I'm always really delighted when I see that episodes have been shared. So tune in tomorrow for part 3. Thanks so much for joining me here, and until we're together again, be well.